In this tutorial, we'll be exploring the Fluting Toolpath and some examples of where it may be used. The first example, we're going to show you how to lay out 3 simple lines, and using the Fluting Toolpath, we're going to create a column for the mantelpiece that you can see on screen here. We'll look at a further example to show you how to use the fluting to create drainage channels on a cutting board. Another example will illustrate how we can use the fluting to create an interesting texture. And then finally, we'll look at a final example of how you can use the fluting to shape the top of a seat. And so the whole point of this is just to demonstrate the number of ways in which we can use the Fluting Toolpath and how the various controls will provide us with different shapes dependent on the vectors that you have. So let's go over to File, Close. So let's go and create a new file. So we're working with a single-sided job. We're going to go with a width of 36 inches, a height of 6 inches, and then our material thickness is going to be 1 inch in there. We'll set our Z0 position off the material surface. Our X0, Y0 datum position will be in the lower left hand corner, and then we could simply go ahead and press OK. So the first thing that we're going to do is draw a set of lines. To start us off, we're going to come over to the Create Vectors section of the Drawing tab and use the Draw Line option. We're going to put in a start point where 4 is X, and then for Y we're going to have that at 1.5, and then use the add option. Okay, so that's there. And I'm just going to drag this out so it is 28 inches long. I can see that looking at the cursor there, and if I click to accept that, I can right click to come out of the polyline tool. And so with this line, I want to create 2 copies of that going up the y-axis so that we have a total of 3 lines. So to do that, we're going to go and use the Array Copy tool, which is this icon here. So if we click on that, in here we just need to specify the rows and the columns and how we want to space the lines. Okay, so I want 3 rows in total in the y-axis, so we're going to type in 3 there. We're going to go with 1 in X. Then we need to specify our spacing. Okay, so we could choose a gap spacing, or we could go with an offset. In this case, I'd like to have a gap, so between each line I'd like to have a gap of 1.5 inches in the y-axis. So we'd have our next line followed by another 1.5 inch gap for the third line. Okay, so we're just going to type in 1.5 for Y in there, and then we could simply go ahead and press copy, and there we have our 3 lines that are spaced out up the y-axis by 1.5 inches. So let's close out of there. Okay, so now I've got my 3 vectors that I would like to flute. We can now switch over to the Toolpaths tab. So to do that, let's use this icon here to switch out of the Drawing tab and into the Toolpaths tab. So the first thing that we're going to do is check over our material setup. So let's use the Set button here. Our material thickness is 1 inch. XY datum position, we're going to still keep that in the lower left hand corner. We'll set as a 0 position of the material surface. Check over your rapidity gaps above the material and your home and start position, ensuring everything is safe and appropriate for your machine. And then we could go ahead and press OK. Okay, so to access the Fluting Toolpath, you go into this icon here, and if we click on that, that will open up the Fluting Toolpath form. Okay, so at the start we need to specify our cut depths. So we specify our start depth to begin with, so we're going to set that to be 0, and then we specify our flute depth. So that's the maximum cut depth that we're going to create for our flute. In this case, let's just go with 1/4 inch for our first example. And then we need to specify our tool. So we'll use the select option here, and that will open up the tool database. In this case, we want to use a fairly large tool, so we're going to look at using a 1/2 inch ball nose. And then with the pass depth of 1/4 inch, this will allow us to create the flute in one single pass. So let's go ahead and press select here. So the next two options within the form really allow us to define the shape of our flute. So the first section here describes the flute type. So we have three options. So the first option is where we can ramp over the complete length. And so what that will do is it will start at 0 at the start point of your vector, and as it travels down it's just constantly ramping down to the end point, where the end point would be at the flute depth that we have specified here. So in our case it will start at 0 and work its way down to 1/4 of an inch at the end point. The second option is to ramp at the start. So here we're just going to specify a ramp length or a ramp percentage for the start, and so it will ramp down to the length specified and then just continue at a constant flute depth of 1/4 of an inch, again as in our example. And then the third option is where we also apply a ramp at the end. So not only do we ramp in at a length or a percentage at the start and then continue flat, but we also ramp out to get back up to 0 at the end. And so we're going to use this option in our example. And so with that, we need to choose how long the ramp is going to be. At the moment we can see we have a ramp percentage of 100%, and so what will happen is it's going to ramp all of the way to the middle of the vector, and then it will lift off and then come back out up to the end. Now we want to just control the distance here, so I'm going to go by a ramp length. I'm going to specify a length here of 1 inch, so it's going to ramp in at 1 inch, continue flat at the 1/4 inch, and then for the last 1 inch of that vector it's going to ramp back up again. Then we have the ramp type. So we have two options, we have linear and smooth. So linear will just enter the flute in a straight diagonal line, and then we have smooth, and that will just enter in at a curve, and so it will create a smooth transition at the bottom of our flute. So we're going to go with this option here. Then we can simply give our toolpath a name. We'll just call this one fluting, press calculate, and we could take a look at the part. Okay, so if we just tilt this view we can better see what's happening. Okay, so at the start you can see that the tool is going to be ramping in, and it's 1 inch long, and as it meets the 1 inch length it's going to be at the 1/4 of an inch depth. That will remain consistent all the way through the flute until we have 1 inch left at the end, in which the tool is going to ramp out. Okay, so let's just preview that toolpath. Okay, so you can take a look at that, so you can see the result there. It ramping in a smooth transition, goes in flat all the way, and then smoothly ramps out at the end. And so this is the result of using 3 simple vectors, the Fluting Toolpath and a 1/2 inch ball nose tool. You can see that it's very effective. So let's go ahead and just save this file. So we'll go to File, Save As, and then in the Project folder we'll call this one Fluting Guide 2.5D Toolpaths, and you can access that from there. Now we're going to show you 3 examples to really show how powerful the Fluting Toolpath is. We've already demonstrated how simple it is to create a fluting toolpath, but there are a number of ways you can creatively use the fluting toolpath for a number of results, and we've seen a lot of evidence of this on the Vectric user forum, and we'll look at one of the files that was posted on there shortly. So let's just go to File, and we're just going to open up a file. We're going to open up the cutting board flute vectors file that you can access from your project folder. So let's open that up. Okay, so here we have a set of simple vectors that have been drawn in the software. And we're going to use these vectors to cut in grooves for a drainage channel on a cutting board. Now the outer shape is actually 2 vectors, and we're going to look at cutting 2 channels flowing from the middle left hand side all the way to the right hand side. Okay, so let's just switch over to the Toolpaths tab. So the first thing that we must do is set up our material. So we're working with a material that's going to be 3/4 of an inch deep. We're going to set the XY position in the lower left hand corner as the 0 position on the material surface. Check over your rapid Z gaps and home start position to ensure that they're safe and appropriate, and then go ahead and press OK. So now that we're all set up, we can now select the vectors that we need for the fluting toolpath. Okay, this vector here we're not going to use as part of the fluting toolpath. We're going to look at pocketing this, and we'll do that shortly. So I'm just going to take my mouse and I'm just going to click and drag up in the left direction, and any vector that is lay within the selection box will be highlighted when I let go. Okay, so with all of those vectors selected, let's go over to the fluting toolpath. Okay, so without going into the fluting toolpath just yet, I can see by looking at the 2D view that the start point for this line is over on the right hand side, and we want the start point over to the left hand side so that everything is fluting from the left down into the right. So to do that, let's just take this vector here, go into node edit mode, right click and use this option here to reverse the direction. Right click again to come out of that, and right click to go back into normal selection mode. Then we'll just drag that box for all the vectors that we want to use to flute, and now everything is on the left hand side. Okay, so let's start by looking at the cutting depths. So for the start depth, we're actually just going to start it a little bit below the surface. So we're going to put in a value of 0.05. And then for the flute depth, we're going to go in at 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to be cutting a total value of 0.3 of an inch. Now we need to specify our tool. So we use the select option here. And in the ball nose option, we're going to go ahead and select a 1/2 inch ball nose. Use the select option there. Flute type, okay, in this case we want to ramp over the complete length in a straight line from the start to the end of the vectors. Okay, so we're going to use that option there where we're going to ramp in a linear fashion. We'll give this the name, so we're just going to call this one Fluting Channels. Go ahead and press calculate so you can see what that looks like, and then we could go ahead and preview that toolpath. Okay, so you can see that we're just getting more depth at the bottom because it's ramping over the entire length of the vector itself. Okay, so I like what we've got there. So now we could look at creating the pocket toolpath to sit on the right hand side of our drainage board. Right then, so let's just put that in Z, and then we'll just close out of the preview toolpaths form. Go back into the 2D view, and then we'll select the vector that represents the area that we want to pocket. Now you'll notice that it's slightly larger than the vector that we used to flute, and that's because fluting travels on the line, and so the actual cut shape of the flute would be the radius of the tool either side of that line, and so we've took that into account when drawing up this shape. So with that vector selected, let's go over into the pocket toolpath. So we're going to apply a start depth of 0 and a cut depth. We're going to go with 0.3, so that's going to match the total depth that we've done already with the fluting toolpath. Then we need to select a tool, so we'll use the select option here to open up the tool database. In this case, I'd like to use a 1/2 inch ball nose to cut out the pocket. However, I don't want to cut all of the pocket with this tool, as we'll be left with cusps from the rounded tool. So we're just going to look at using a larger area clearance tool. So we'll select this option here. And if we use the select option, that will open up the tool database, in which case I'd like to use the 1/2 inch end mill, and we could go ahead and select that, and then this will clear up the majority of the toolpath, and then we'll have the ball nose just clean up the edges using that 1/2 inch ball nose. Okay, then we need to choose our strategy. Okay, so in this case we'll go with an offset strategy so it matches the shape of that pocket, And we could simply give that a name. We're just going to call that one pocket, and then we can calculate that. Okay, so you can see we've got two tools here. We've got a clearance tool and then the pocket. So let's just undraw the pocket toolpath. So this is the clear tool. So if we preview that, so that's using the end mill. And so we can see that that's got rid of quite a lot of the material. So now if we just draw the visibility of the bullnose tool, okay, you can see that it's coming down in two passes. Now we needn't have that first pass. It's the end mill's cleared a lot of it away, so really it's safe for us to actually run this as one pass. So if we just double click on that pocket there, we're just going to edit the parameters just for the bullnose. So if we use the edit option here, we're just going to alter the pass depth so it's 0.3, so we're matching the total depth that we're cutting there. OK that, and if we go ahead and calculate that, and if we just take that pocket, we can see now it's doing that in one pass. So now we could go ahead and preview that, and there is the finished part. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So let's just put that back in Z. So now let's look at some more unusual ways to use the Fluting Toolpath. So let's go to File, Open, and we're going to open the texture flutevectors.crv file. Press Open. I'm not going to save this. So here we have a set of simple straight lines that I've drew in the software. And each line is 4 inches long. So if I click, you can see that where it's selected, that is 4 inches long. And every other set of lines, I've actually moved up or down by half the length of the line. So if I click over here by holding down Shift, you'll see how this one is now half the way up to the adjacent line over here. Okay, also we've got our vectors organised onto layers, so everything on layer 1 has a set of 3 lines, like so, and then everything on layer 2 has 4 lines. We've got 1, 2, 3 and 4. So let's just press Ctrl A on the keyboard. That's going to select all of our vectors. We're going to switch straight over to the Toolpaths tab and go straight in to the Fluting Toolpath. Okay, so we're going to start with a start depth of 0. Our flute depth we're going to come in at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so the tool we're going to look at using, let's use the select option here. Okay, now I'd actually like to use a larger bullnose. I've got a 1-inch bullnose that I'd like to try this texture on, and so we need to add that bullnose into our database. So I'm going to take the 1/2-inch bullnose and I'm actually going to copy the data there. Okay, so you can see it's been added there. However, it's ghosted out, so I need to add in some information before we actually create this tool. So here we're going to go with a diameter of 1 inch, and you can see it's changed there. I'm actually going to copy the settings from the hardwood material of the 1/2-inch bullnose. So we're going to copy that over, but then we're just going to alter the parameters to match the new tool. So we'll have a pass depth there of 1/2 inch. I could maybe look at increasing the feed rate there to 120, and then we could simply go ahead and press apply. Okay, so it's now added that tool, and now we can select that from the tool database. Okay, so working down the form, we can choose our flute type. Okay, so here we're actually going to look at ramping at the start and the end at a ramp rate of 100%. So each one of these lines will create a kind of U shape where it goes down and lifts back up again. We're also going to do that in a smooth type. Okay, so it's going to smoothly come down and ramp back up, come down and ramp back up. Right then, so let's just go ahead and calculate that. So we'll use the calculate option. Okay, so we can see the toolpath there, and then if we just go ahead and preview that toolpath, okay, so we can undraw the tool. We could probably do with unchecking the animate preview as well, but you can kind of see what's going on here. So with every line, the tool is coming down to the full depth in the center, and then it's coming back up again, and it's creating this really interesting texture. Okay, it's kind of like a scalloped effect. And so varying the depth and varying the distance between those lines will give me a different effect. And we could also look at changing the tool shape too. So let's have a look at this example with, say, using a V-bit tool. That's going to give us a completely different effect because we're using a V-bit tool, which is a pointed tool rather than a rounded tool. Okay, so I'm just going to uncheck the animate preview option, and then we'll just close out there. We're just going to go back into the Fluting Toolpath form. So let's go into the tool database. Okay, now the tool I want to use is a 120 degree 1 1/4 inch V-bit. Okay, I can see in my list I don't have that, so I'm actually going to take this tool here and I'm going to copy that to create the new tool. So here we're going to go with a 120 degree V-bit. We can see that there. We're just going to copy the settings for the 90 degree one, so we'll press copy there. And then what we can do is we could go ahead and just press apply. Okay, so the pass depth of 1/2 inch is greater than the tool maximum cutting depth. Okay, so it was saying that the maximum pass depth for this tool is 0.361. Okay, so here we'll just go with a conservative value of 0.3, but if you are going to use a tool like this, then please refer to the tool manufacturer's settings along with the material that you're cutting into. Right then, so apply that, and then we can select that tool, and we're just going to calculate that with the same settings. We're going to reset that preview, and then we're going to preview this toolpath. And so there you can see we've got a different effect with that tool. So there's a lot to play around with here. Now the way that we've set up the part is we've done it so that we have alternating set of straight lines on different layers. So we could even think about using two tools to create another variation of this texture. So let's just reset that preview. We're going to go back into the Fluting Toolpath. Okay, so with this tool we're going to use the selector option, and we're going to use all open vectors for layer 1. We're going to associate that with that toolpath, and so what it will do is it's pulled out all of the vectors for layer 1, and then we're going to go ahead and calculate that, and we can go ahead and preview that. And then what we'll do for the second one is we'll go ahead and run the ball nose tool on the second layer. Okay, so it's just working its magic there. Okay, so there's that set, and even this texture looks very interesting in itself. Okay, so let's just close out, and then we'll go into the Fluting Toolpath. Okay, so again, or what we could do is we could right click and just duplicate that toolpath. We'll double click on there. Okay, this time we're going to use the 1 inch ball nose. We'll select that. Go into the vector selector option. This time we're going to change it to layer 2 and associate that with that toolpath. Close out, then we could go ahead and calculate that, and then we could go ahead and preview that toolpath. And there we have another interesting effect there. So there's lots of variations that you can create from the spacing between the lines, the depth of cut, and the tool shape and size. So now we're going to look at one last example of how we could apply the Fluting Toolpath. And this was actually created by one of our user forum members, Bob Jr. So let's just go to File, Close, and we just no to that. We don't need to save that. We'll go in and open an existing file. Then we'll open the Seat Flute Vectors file, press open, and here is the file. So we can see that Bob Jr. created here was a set of vectors that are straight, and then they kind of radiate in a semicircular movement, and then they go back down into a straight again. and what he's done here is cut the shape of a seat using the Fluting Toolpath. So let's go over to the Toolpaths tab to see how he did that. I'm going to start by looking at the material setup. Okay, so our material thickness is 3/4 of an inch. We're setting our Z0 of the material surface, XY in the lower left hand corner, and then we've got our rapid Z gaps above the material at 0.5 and our plunge at 0.5 also. Okay, so just very small clearance and plunge there, which should be okay. But you want to check over the rapid Z gaps and home and start position to ensure that it's safe for your setup. Right, and so we'll go ahead and press OK here. Okay, so we're going to go and press Ctrl A on the keyboard to select all of those vectors, and then we're going to go straight into the Fluting Toolpath. Okay, start depth, we're going to set that to 0. Flute depth, we're going to make that 0.3. We're going to use the select option to select a tool from the tool database. In this case, we want to look at using a 1/4 inch end mill in there, and we'll select that. Okay, so this time we want to ramp at the start and the end. We're going to do that 100% in a smooth ramp type. Then we could just simply go ahead and press calculate. And then if we just put that in the ISO view, we can see how it's ramping at the start and then it ramps back up at the end there. And we could go ahead and preview that toolpath. And there is the seat. So you can see the result that we have here, and really we're just demonstrating the possibilities of using the Fluting Toolpath in much more unusual ways. We've seen users create bowl shapes and other curve shapes using this similar method of using closely positioned vectors. And so that completes this tutorial on the many ways that you can use the Fluting Toolpath.